self-actualization.
Realize that everything connects to everything else.
But the more of the control problem that we solve in advance, the better the odds that the transition to the machine intelligence era will go well.
Have you ever asked what is the root of money?
And I think that loving learning is something that students do struggle with because of the way the education system kind of works now.
We do not have limited resources. We have limited ideas of how to allocate and use the resources that we have.
Signaling devices abound, helping people reliably convey otherwise hidden information.
The best argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average voter.
It's the ABCs of Psychology, a Ferret Institute production. Let us start now.
Hi Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. How about yourself?
Can't complain. Thank you for agreeing to join us today. We're going to dive in on Bitcoin and other ideas. Would you want to give a quick introduction about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for having me. So I am a patent attorney. I'm based in Columbus, Ohio, and I work for a venture fund here. I dove into the crypto rabbit hole initially in 2013 and then kind of forgot about it as nerd money and never really thought much about it after that. And then in the end of 2016/early 2017, it really, as it reemerged kind of in more popular media and publications, I became completely 100% immersed, obsessed, and since that time have spent a lot of time trying to understand the technology, the governance, and the various players and stakeholders and future.
All right. Very cool. So I think that's an interesting point to kind of start. You know, you got into crypto early, but then you left and now you're back. What was kind of the initial interest and then the fade, and then obviously the media kind of brought it back, but what got you into it to begin with?
Yeah, I think so. Initially I was I was a part of a student-led investment fund, and one of the companies that pitched was a Bitcoin mining company, and they wanted to basically buy rig. They already had rigs in Iceland, and they wanted to buy more. And I had not really heard of. I had heard of Bitcoin before that through my brother as a student at Ohio State. A couple of his friends were into it, and then we kind of really looked at the deal as far as investing in the miners, but really didn't fit our investment thesis as far as creating jobs and local entrepreneurship, since there was just going to be basically servers and a rigging machine in Iceland. But you know, the idea, and it probably would have been an excellent investment in hindsight, but it really was an interesting concept and really gets you thinking more about what money is and how the underlying technology works, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And then what brought it back was, I mean, obviously, yeah, the media coverage and the prices that, you know, began really running up in late 16, early 2017. It became a force that every day you open Bloomberg or Wall Street Journal and there's articles, and it's hard to ignore at this point.
That's a great way to put it. Hard to ignore today. Have you explored, as you're trying to, learn and research this more, have you run into any other, as they call them, altcoins that you find interesting?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of different iterations that are extremely interesting. I mean, I think the most pervasive, compelling one right now is Ethereum, with the token obviously being Ether. And then there are a lot of altcoins tokens built on top of Ethereum that are extremely interesting. So I think the entire Ethereum Turing complete platform is probably the most compelling technological and from a talent perspective. I mean, from what I've understand, there's 30 times more developers working in the Ethereum ecosystem versus any other platform or application. So I think Ethereum's definitely a major advancement from a technology perspective, but there are others. I mean, Zcash, Monero for the privacy applications, Blockstack, Uport, Civic from the sovereign individual identity applications. There's a lot of various protocols around the decentralized exchanges as far as peer-to-peer token exchanges. So there's a lot of different interesting developments besides for just Bitcoin. And Bitcoin itself has a lot of exciting technology developments. The Lightning protocol is on the test net, and actually it's some people are using it live, although the creators aren't recommending that. But there's tons of technology advancements occurring on a daily basis.
Taking a step back, I kind of, when I talk with people, I always ask them how would you describe what Bitcoin or what a blockchain is? Because I think for a lot of people, they kind of struggle to understand what it is and how it actually works. What's your kind of quick elevator pitch for it, of how it works?
Yeah, and that's a question that a lot of very smart people would answer differently. I mean, I think the simplest way is a decentralized ledger, a transactional database that is an open protocol that easily allows transfer between two parties that don't trust each other. So a trustless protocol layer for value exchange. People call it the Internet of Money. There are distributed ledger technology is sort of a buzzword phrase that encompasses more than blockchain, but similar concepts. There's IOTA with their Tangle network. So that's not a simple answer, but I guess most simply it's a distributed, decentralized ledger.
Okay. And I want to kind of jump back out a little more, and then we'll dive back in here in a minute. Just in general of kind of the questions I'd sent over a little bit beforehand. Obviously, we won't cover all of them, but what do you think the purpose of money should be?
Should be?
Yes.
Well, I think the academic definition of the three elements of what money is it's a unit account, a medium of an exchange, and a store of value. And I think in general, I think that is really beyond what I think it should be. I think that's just kind of a definition historically of the purpose that money has served. And I think those are it's sort of TBD how those three criteria will be met by blockchain and cryptocurrency.
Mm-hmm. And I think you brought up store of value there. I think as some people are reading the Wall Street Journal and things, they see the price going from almost 20,000 to I think today we're down by 8. Do you think how would you respond to that if someone kind of saying, how is this actually a store of value if it's still so wildly swinging?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, the same could be said for stocks or bonds, but I mean, I don't know if people necessarily make those arguments that those are store value. I mean, I think from an investment perspective, they are. And I mean, the drops in the last 30 days are relative. I mean, if anyone that purchased before mid 2017 are still up as far as net compared to their cost basis. But I think it's a fair point, and there are a lot of smart people working on what are called oh my gosh, I'm going to forget the name of it, but basically the idea that it's stable coins. So the idea that these tokens would be pegged to some sort of more traditional asset that it doesn't have the sort of volatility that Bitcoin or Ether or any other the crypto assets tend to exhibit.
Okay. I haven't researched that one yet. I'll have to dive into that a little more.
yeah, MakerDAO is one. Tether is one that has very controversial, especially as of recently. They were audited, and it's Tether is supposed to be backed by the U.S. dollar. So every unit of Tether, there's a dollar sitting in a vault somewhere, and the creators were the same people that created the largest exchange in the world, which is Bitfinex. So it's very controversial, but they're not the only ones with the idea of a stable coin. MakerDAO is another one, and there's others as well.
Well, I think we're kind of zooming in here on the idea of value, and I guess to kind of put phrases in to hear how you react is, what exactly is value? For me, I kind of see value as it's relative, where each person in each situation is going to value something differently. How would you phrase what value is?
Yeah, I think value is the exchange between parties where both parties are better off. If I go to the grocery store and I hand a $20 bill the grocery store is better off because they bought whatever I purchased for less than $20, and I'm better off because I value having whatever I purchased more than the opportunity cost of what I could have done with that $20 elsewhere. So I think it's, in my mind, I characterize value as creating situations where parties are better off than they would. Both parties are better, or multiple parties are better than they were than before a transaction.
Mm-hmm. A win-win. I agree.
A win-win. Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I'd be interested to hear, especially if you come from, a law and bit of an investment background. I've always viewed investing as, I have some capital that I'm trying to allocate to the right people who can then go use it to purchase the right resources to create more value. How would you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. I think in that example, investors want to invest their money in organizations and people that are able to grow the value of the company, and the company is willing to sell certain percentage because they need capital to grow. So I think that's a very, very logical analogy.
Okay. And, part of that also involves, risk management, in the sense that let's look at traditional investing, but also like a Bitcoin investing as well, or, just using Bitcoin for transactions. We have to establish, a trust, obviously, between the network, and hopefully the blockchain does that. What about, managing for risk? And we kind of touched on this a little bit before about the price swings. Do you think there's a good cryptocurrency out there that's working on being able to manage risk of, okay, I get involved in this cryptocurrency, but then it doesn't end up performing, or, I have a loss of my value per se?
Yeah, there's different theories on that. I mean, there's hedge funds that kind of are able to invest in multiple different assets and can rebalance pretty actively. There are certain tokens, actually. There's a C21, which I recently came across, that gives exposure to the top 20 crypto assets by market cap, and that also rebalances. There's obviously individually, you could kind of build a portfolio that could, in theory, allow for diversification and hedging of various risks. The problem is the crypto markets tend to rise and fall sort of in tandem, or at least to a high degree of correlation. And one of the main arguments, and there's a great book by Chris Berniski called Crypto Assets, and from an investor perspective, that's, in my opinion, kind of the baseline place to start. And really the thesis is he came from traditional Wall Street, is Wall Street investors are always trying to diversify risk, and the non-correlated investments are the best because they are able to provide the best diversification. And in theory, Bitcoin and other crypto assets provide high reward to risk ratio, and more importantly, not an uncorrelated risk profile, so not correlated to traditional economic or investment assets.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you touched on a good point there too, is that a lot of them are moving in the same direction. So everyone's watching Bitcoin, but actually Ethereum was also up very high for a while, and I think it's coming down again. But they do all have different different ways of working. Do you think that's a public relations kind of thing, or how could some of those become uncorrelated? Because there are differences between a lot of these different blockchains.
Oh yeah, it can very much so. I think it's more market sentiment and just risk on versus risk off in general versus positions on specific protocols or technologies or tokens themselves. So I think it's more a broader market sentiment and sort of just timing issues as far as people needed to sort of cash out to fiat in order to pay taxes or whatever sort of macro conditions are existing.
Mm-hmm. So with Bitcoin, there's the idea that it's decentralized. I think it is Ripple that is centralized. Are you familiar with Ripple at all?
Yes, I am.
How do you feel about the two, kind of the debate here between something that's completely decentralized versus something centralized?
Yeah, and that's really kind of the genesis of crypto and the kind of the crypto economics and blockchain, is the idea that decentralization and not having internet service providers or the application layers, Facebook, Google, being the silos of people's data and having a more decentralized internet, really Web3. And in Ripple specifically, the true cypherpunk early Bitcoin blockchain people, they hate Ripple. I mean, the consensus is, it's created by the banks and it's not decentralized, like you said, and it doesn't represent what the ethos of crypto and Bitcoin was meant to enable. And the original white paper that by Satoshi Nakamoto really was the timing and the thesis leading up to it was it was right as the mortgage-backed security market decline was against the banks, against the centralized fiat-based bank-controlled economy, and Ripple is seen as sort of not in alignment with that vision. And from my perspective, I mean, they have been Ripple has been around for a while. They do have a live operating product. I think it's called RippleNet. But whether the value of XRP, which is the token, truly has value is very much uncertain. And from the analysis I've seen, it's probably unlikely, but I mean, the same could be said for a lot of the different assets. So, but from a theoretical and kind of core thesis standpoint, it's definitely the antithesis of what the cypherpunk crypto movement kind of embodies.
To kind of digress a little bit, this is where I would start transitioning into, the idea of government, and that there's decentralized government versus centralized government. I've been fortunate enough to live in China and America, which are supposed to be extremes, but they're actually much more similar than most people think. America is supposed to be more of a decentralized government, and China is supposed to be very centralized. And that's a whole other discussion that they're basically the same thing. But one thing that is true is that because something is centralized in China, they can just do it very quickly, implement it very quickly. They're building airports and railroads at an amazing speed, while in America we're no matter which side of the political aisle you're on, we can't even pass a budget. So that's, I think, kind of comes back into the Bitcoin and Ripple idea of having some centralized versus decentralized. Going off that, how do you feel about Bitcoin Cash?
Yeah, it's funny, the Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin Classic, I guess you could say, or just Bitcoin, is in my opinion. But that will raise religious-like fervor from people, and I think the general consensus is that Bitcoin Cash is being driven by a sort of handful of people, Roger Ver, the Bitmain gentleman in China, who I forget his name, and then Craig Wright. So there's kind of a handful of people, and I do think they have good intentions, and there's no question that the scalability of Bitcoin in its current state is very much an issue, and the network's congested, and allowing for larger block sizes, which is what Bitcoin Cash enables, is potentially needed. And but the issue is how it was done. It was kind of done without the consensus of the developer community at the New York agreement at a big conference called Consensus in New York City. And it wasn't done in a way that had alignment from the developer community. And that's ultimately what people really resented. And I personally don't believe Bitcoin Cash has a credible future, there's also certain specific issues, like Bitcoin Cash runs on miners that Bitmain has a patent to. It's called Boost ASIC, these application-specific integrated chips. So it's kind of in their own interest to have Bitcoin Cash dominate more hash power, but that's sort of in the weeds. But point being, I think Bitcoin Cash is well-intentioned, not well executed, and ultimately doesn't have the mind share of the majority of the Bitcoin believers and developers, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't seek to address the problem of scalability, which there's no question is needed. And there's a lot of people in the Bitcoin, a lot of really good technology developments happening to kind of enable what Bitcoin Cash wants, which is scalability, specifically segregated witness, and more recently the Lightning Network, which is a kind of second layer off-chain transactional, which allows for more day-to-day micropayment transactional use cases of Bitcoin.
That's a great segue into my next area I wanted to go. I think scalability and adoption, this is where I would digress into psychology of, we were all born in the world where fiat money is the main source of money. What do you think it'll take to, reach a tipping point? Are you familiar with I think it's, what's the guy's name?
Malcolm Gladwell?
Sorry, say again?
Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point?
Yeah, kind of like that, getting that first 18%. Like if we could, I'd say maybe 2% of the U.S. population kind of understands Bitcoin. I think 50% read it, but 2 actually understand it or use it. How do we hit that 18% that would then kind of tip in, a mass adoption of maybe not Bitcoin, but some sort of blockchain?
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that this is very much a international phenomenon issue. I think developing countries are able to sort of grasp the importance and the need much easier. I mean, one of the people in Columbus that got me really into the rabbit hole, I guess you would say, is a Somalian guy that, his family had money in Somalia, and then the Somalian currency, I don't even know what it was, basically crashed, and at that point they didn't have any money anymore. So they have an innate distrust of government and of their government issued currency, retaining its value. And there's, I think, 3.5 billion people in the world, adults that don't even have access to just minimal banking infrastructure. There's countries like Venezuela or Argentina where or Greece, the value of their currency has seen crashes, and people that had money and one day, the next day, their money's worth nothing. So I think in those countries, it's a lot easier to grasp the idea of a decentralized global store of value currency. Within the United States, I mean, I think there's significant, and in China, as I'm sure you're well aware, there's the idea of paying with your phone is just second nature. Everyone uses WeChat, and there's no friction or aversion to using your phone for payments. And I think as far as the U.S. specifically, I mean, there's no question its adoption of using cryptocurrency today is too technology prohibitive to really allow for mass adoption. So there needs to be significant improvement in user interfaces, just usability. I mean, to transfer from logging out, the main on-ramp today for the retail person that has heard Bitcoin enough that they want to dabble in it a little bit is to go to Coinbase and you use your credit card or checking account and put some money in it. It's pretty easy. But even that, if you want to send it to someone, it's not super easy. I mean, going to the specific wallet, whether it's your Bitcoin wallet or Ether wallet or Litecoin wallet, and then going to the send, and you can either scan a QR code or type in a long address, and then everything goes dark, and you don't know whether the person that you're trying to send it to doesn't have it yet, but it's out of your account because it's in the blockchain being confirmed. There are significant just usability and user interface issues that are undoubtedly need to be overcome before we'll reach any sort of tipping point within the general consumer population.
Mm-hmm. I would definitely agree. If I had to make you... Go ahead.
Every time I think about crypto or blockchain or Bitcoin, it's always so kind of exciting and makes so much sense. But then you go to use it and it's a headache. I mean, even for me, who has been doing this for a little while, not nearly as long as a lot of people, but for over a year, and it's cumbersome. I mean, sending stuff from my hardware wallet to an exchange to another, typing in the wallet to all the authentications that the various exchanges require, and managing passwords and private keys. It's tough, honestly.
Mm-hmm. What do you think is holding it back? Obviously there's a lot of developers working on it. Do you think it's just, keeping up, because we have to have the blockchain and, making access you can't just have it's not like Apple Pay where you just kind of click the button and you're done. Do you think if we had something like that, would that help?
Yeah, definitely. Just simpler user interfaces, simpler usability would help. I think, the technical barriers are definitely known, and I think people are working on that. The other thing is there's just not enough. The main crypto companies right now are so overburdened with demand that they don't even have the resources or people to meet what they're just to maintain service. I mean, Coinbase and the very Binance and all these exchanges, I mean, they are just so buried right now in demand that they're just trying to stay afloat. They're not really worried about making things easier necessarily right now. So I think there needs to be sort of a equilibrium reached where these companies are looking for new growth opportunities as opposed to just satisfying demand that's already overbearing for them.
It's a very good observation. Hadn't thought about that before. Shifting gears a little bit, we had touched on value a little bit earlier. In terms of commodities, what would you see as the most valuable commodity?
By commodity, you mean gold or oil or?
It could be anything. My belief is attention. I think attention is the most valuable commodity today.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. I think attention is ultimately what is going to be the most important commodity moving forward. And I think a lot of the social networks, Facebook, Twitter, and search engines, Google, I think the public is waking up to the fact that these organizations are not necessarily benevolent. They have a duty to increase shareholder value, and the longer they can capture the attention of their customer, of their users, and the more valuable those looks, those eyeballs and clicks will be to their advertisers, and ultimately their business models rely on advertisers, and advertisers rely on eyeballs and clicks. So I think how blockchain can make that more decentralized as opposed to being controlled by these couple of internet not monsters maybe, but internet, giants, is a huge opportunity. And there's companies working on this, Basic Attention Token and others, that really recognize that attention is a very valuable commodity. And Steemit is another one, which basically allows for people to monetize their attention. So if I'm reading an article, if I want to post if I post a critique, or am able to add value to kind of the ecosystem of where I'm consuming that content, then I earn a token and am able to contribute to that ecosystem via attention.
You said that was Steemit?
Steemit is one of them, and then Basic Attention Token, BAT, is another, and there are a couple of others.
I will have to research these more, because I think this is kind of the...
Ad Token is another.
Yeah. This is kind of the antithesis of where I think I'm trying to take these three very broad subjects and put them together. Is that, like you mentioned, business's goal is to increase shareholder value, which, let's use YouTube as an example. We need more advertisers, right? So we need to keep people's attention so we can keep showing them ads, which means that's a lot of psychology, right? Because you're using, for lack of a better word, kind of brainwashing people to stay here and keep looking at things. But is that actually... you're showing these ads to people are buying those products, but does that actually help them move up? If you listen to the Nick's podcast, we talked a little bit about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And, are you helping people move upward, or are you kind of keeping them trapped, perhaps by being addicted to something on perhaps a lower level?
Yeah, and I think the studies show that how those sites are designed and used. I mean, there is a dopamine release that is triggered by consuming that content, which, like you said, incentivizes people to stay longer and use more. And the brain chemistry is definitely designed so dopamine is released and more content is consumed.
Yep, I think that's kind of where I'm trying to go, is if we could create a blockchain of some sort that, help people move up the pyramid of Maslow instead of locking them down in one spot. I think that would be an interesting way to go.
Yeah, definitely.
Moving around again, there's the idea of competition versus, collaboration. And this is not really a question; it's more of just, I guess, say those two words and let you talk. How do you feel about, how do we balance that? Because we can't have. I'll let you go with that. I think you get it.
Competition versus collaboration and cooperation is kind of the issue.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's interesting. I think specifically in regards to blockchain and the cooperation and collaboration aspect is that these are all open source protocols that anyone can have access to and contribute to without any sort of guild system. You just learn the code and start adding value, and if you like the direction the projects are going, you can continue to be a part of that team, and if you don't, then you can copy it and fork it and take projects in your own direction. So I think really these are new governance models that sort of the protocol layers of today's internet, the TCP/IP, the SMTP for email, those were open protocols, but there wasn't a lot of incentive for those protocol layers to be developed, and they weren't how the internet was monetized. The internet was monetized with applications built on top of those various protocol layers, whereas sort of the Web 3.0 vision is for those protocol layers and what is currently being built to capture the value that they create, and that's through an open source system that people today are very are working on, and it's a new it's a new model as far as creating value on the internet at a protocol open source layer. And I think it's exciting that so many projects are being done at the open source layer, and I think it's a testimony to more collaboration and cooperation between developers and the people who have a strong vision for what the future of the internet should look like, and it is an exciting development.
I would agree. It's very exciting. I think if we look 10 years in the future, the world's going to be much different in this sense.
Yeah, and I think one of the coolest things for me is how much really the smartest people, technology people, are all really captivated, and finance people. I think it's caused a lot of finance people that have traditionally lived in these financial institutions to kind of, especially the insightful and curious ones, to kind of learn more about technology and governance and protocols, and it's caused pure technologists to learn more about governance and currencies and economics and politics. So I think it's caused technology people to learn more about economics and politics, and it's caused politicians and finance people to learn more about technology. I think from that perspective, I think no matter where Bitcoin specifically or these other crypto assets that exist today go, I think it's caused a tremendous amount of new ideas for people that are beyond what they think about day to day in their existing roles. So I think that's really exciting. Smart contracts, have huge potential. So I think that's just really exciting. The many directions that the crypto rabbit hole leads to.
Definitely. And I think that's a really good point about, how it's helping people to keep learning. And we can learn things. I think, all right, that dives into the education debate, but it's just, we're taught from such a young age that we can't do certain things, like, oh, I'm just bad at math. But, we can all learn these things. We can all learn how to, do computer programming. We can all learn to speak Chinese. It's things that is possible.
Yeah, and the curious and the ones that dive in, they're going to have an advantage, and it's going to eventually be a value. And the people that are, stubborn and this is tulips and I don't want to learn this because it's hard and doesn't make sense, I mean, those are the people that are going to be sort of left behind.
You have to adapt. All right, we are getting towards the end here. I want to ask a couple not really related questions, but I like hearing people's responses. The first one would be, why are we not 100% honest all of the time?
Yeah, I think people are evolved to act in their own self-interest, and I think sometimes it can be easier and more self-fulfilling to act in what's in someone's best interest as opposed to honest. And I think blockchains are honestly a mechanism for sort of taking trust out of an equation, as far as allowing individuals that maybe or may not be trustworthy to interact. And I think that's, The Economists, I think in late 2015, called blockchain the trust machine. And I think honesty and trust are really fundamentally what the blockchain technology is designed to maybe not enable, but basically circumvent. Circumvent makes it seem like you're getting around honest. You're making it unnecessary, I guess.
I think circumvent might be a fair word. I think that's an interesting way to catch people's attention about it, at least.
Yeah.
What, how many years away do you think, or if ever, would people be willing to put basically everything on a blockchain? Like, have a little robot flying around taking a video of them the whole time, and then that's going on the blockchain. Do you think we could ever get there? Or should we get there?
Maybe. I think there are technology developments that are happening, and beyond whether it should or shouldn't, I think that are just going to. I can see a world where most assets are commoditized and on the blockchain, and to think that the blockchain isn't around is like to say that the internet won't be around. It's just sort of such an illogical conclusion that it doesn't make a lot of sense.
All right, what's the meaning of life?
The meaning of life. Finding out what someone's good at and likes, and dedicating your time and energy to that while trying to make people around you better and happier, and making yourself better and happier.
Awesome. I think that's a very good thing. All right. Are there any questions or topics I didn't ask or you think we should get into here in the last couple minutes?
No, I think we talked a little bit about politics. I think as the testimony from the SEC and CFTC this week illuminated, I think the U.S. ultimately can sort of can be applauded for taking a pretty progressive, tolerant view of this new technology. I mean, basically most of the enforcement actions to date have been fraudulent and, just unwholesome, I guess we would say. But, I think the U.S. has taken a really good restrained approach and sort of let innovation and technology progress. And they definitely are watching it very, very closely. But I think the over the next year or two, there's going to be more guidelines that businesses and actors will be able to have more clarity around the legal ramifications of raising capital through ICOs or putting assets on blockchains and how smart contracts are enforced, etc. So I think from the legal and regulatory perspective, I think there's going to be a lot of clarity in the next year or two, which will ultimately lead to more real world adoption and less scams, honestly.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's definitely a good thing. As you know, like we said at the beginning, there's government is going to be involved here eventually, so make sure they're involved the right way. All right.
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Dan. Do you have anything that there's probably like 4 people listening to this by now. Was there anything you'd like them to go do, buy, or learn?
Put $50 on Coinbase and not as an investment, and buy some Bitcoin and Litecoin and Ether, and just figure out how to move it and what an address is, etc. And listening to Nick Szabo's podcast is a great starting point. Chris Bernitzky's Crypto Assets is a great book from an investment perspective, and always starting with the primary sources. I mean, I think before anyone should have an opinion, I think it's amazing how many people that I meet that have such strong anti-opinions or even positive opinions, but have never even read the Bitcoin white paper or Ethereum white paper and don't even understand the technology. It's one of the few areas that I've come across that people have very strong opinions without having any understanding of the issues or even tried to understand the issues, which is, I mean, people don't pretend to understand genomics or oncology. They just say, I don't know, but people for some reason do have opinions on blockchain and crypto without ever having read the even primary documents. So I think starting with the primary documents is important.
It's great advice. Do your own research is always important. So
yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Dan, and we will sign off here.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it, and have a good day.
Thank you for listening to the ABCs of Psychology, a Ferret Institute production. Please send feedback and join us next time.